Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome Supervising Art Director Tom Brown, who joins us to talk about his work on Dune Part 2. Tom will talk us through about the experience of working on the film and how they went about topping their predecessor. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Tom. Hi, Tom. Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
We're here to sit down and talk about Dune Part 2, which has had its release recently in the past couple of weeks. It feels like the world has been waiting a long time for the second part, especially with all the delays and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's finally here.
Good. It's good to see it. We were promised it last October, and then it was delayed again, for during the strike. So I knew the great thing about this movie one of its great things is the cast. And so not to have those guys going all over the world talking about the movie would have been a tragedy, really. So I'm just glad it's out. I can finally breathe a sigh of relief.
I guess as well, like as someone who's worked on it and then having people watch it, like how have you found the reception of the film?
Oh, I mean, astonishing. I mean, I was invited to the London premiere, and I don't think I've ever seen Leicester Square taken over like that before. In which they wanted to recreate Arrakis and various elements because it is a big deal. This movie, it is a really big deal. It wasn't one of the biggest films I've ever worked on in terms of time, but I think because of the kudos of it, because of the cast, because of the director, because of the subject matter, it just became a snowball. I mean, I think everyone was slightly tentative about part one because even with the cast, were they going to be able to sell this as a science? I mean, it's a big ask to make a science fiction film that becomes a masterpiece, especially one as complex as this, because it is a complex story. I mean, everyone who's tried to read the book has probably given up halfway because it's got so many cross plots and a different language and it's got a message as well, an ecological message. So, but I think that everyone was gratified when part two came out and it got the reception that it did, because I don't think I heard a bad review. I think IndieWire might have said something detrimental, but other than that, absolutely amazed and really grateful.
I guess as well, like when you're having those experiences as well, because when you come to go to the premiere, that's probably the sort of time where you're probably putting in like an end of chapter on your journey with it, but at the same time, you're kind of like getting the fruits of your labor by being there. I think always premieres are slightly like weird sort of things because it's just like it was just a good atmosphere the whole time. It's like no one's sort of dreading, especially if it's something as big as Dune Part 2, where people are sort of anticipating it, so there's no dread of like, well, how is this going to go down? It's just feels like a bit of a part of the atmosphere, which is, I would say.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't really like them that. I like cast and crew screenings, but premieres are not my favorite because I think there were about 10 people in that audience that actually worked on the film, and everybody else was just there to get the photograph taken. But it went down well.
But no, that's good. And then also those events always, you need to drum up buzz. Why?
Oh God, yeah. No, I've been in this industry since 1981, I think it is, and it was all very glamorous when I first began, and then you suddenly realize that it's all down to drumming up box office. So, but it's great that it's done so well, and I think by the sounds of things, if Denis gets Dune Messiah together, then we'll complete the trilogy, really, or what's called a trilogy, strange enough, but this is only part two of the same book.
Yeah, which is again fair enough that the studio allowed him to do that,
Mm,
rather
mm,
than sort of cram it all into one.
mm.
Just because there's probably so many different ways that you can. Uh, there's probably so many things that they'd probably cut out that you wouldn't really allow the story to breathe if it was just.
Well, funnily enough, it's funny. Denis part one, we did so much additional photography when the film was finished, and we all left Budapest and came back from the desert and stuff, and it was all wrapped up. And then there was a discussion that Denis, what we were going to call, we thought it was going to be reshoots, but every scene that we shot additionally was new to the script. We didn't repeat anything, and so for a film, for a company like Legendary to allow that to happen, is they must have known that it was pretty special. And I think because a lot of things, you can read Dune and get very confused about it, but Denis is such a really good writer that he knows that he's got to explain things in such a way that the audience will get it. And I think that was one of the problems with Lynch's Dune, as far as I'm concerned, was that it was just hard to follow because you didn't know who these people were. And I think, Denis made it more human and more appealing. So, but we were astounded that and we did it during COVID. We shot so much stuff during COVID. We went back to Budapest and we rebuilt some sets and did some new sets and stuff. Like there was this great scene that Denis shot, which was the officers' mess on Caladan, and it had a great scene with Gurney playing his balalaika, but we never used it. We never used it, and it was shot and done, but it never appeared in the film. So it was strange because you think it was written for a specific purpose, but obviously when he cut it, it didn't fit in. So, and we all trust in the anyway. So
I guess as well, like as a studio, to just trust the your director and producers to go ahead and just shoot
mm,
all of those sort of that footage
mm,
because it's very like in this sort of time there are a lot of reshoots, but they're not really. They're more to sort of fix little areas of the film that
mm,
might
mm.
need help fixing, or there's a shot missed here or there.
Yeah, yeah.
But it feels like something that, when they did the Lord of the Rings trilogy, how they shot all three films back to back.
Mm, mm.
Which is something, if you said that to someone now, it's like, what a crazy idea. If you have a plan and you know
Mm,
what your end goal is and how you're going to do it all, then it can be done. It's just
mm.
a bit of trust is needed.
Yeah, yeah. And it always fascinated me with Lord of the Rings because I remember when I was watching the making of them, they were saying that one scene looking at Elijah Wood one direction was shot very early on, and the reverse shot was done like 2 years later of the actor that he was looking at. And that's incredible. When you think about that, when they look at it and think, they've got the ability to do that is incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And but even
Mm,
like
mm.
that, like 2 year gap, it's like,
Yeah,
how did I look at this guy again? Um,
true.
but going back to June Part Two
Yeah,
itself,
sorry.
how did the project come about? When I was
For
doing my
me,
research, you'd worked on the first film, but what made you want to come back for the second film?
I was offered the first one in 2018. I came in and replaced the original supervising art director for whatever reason I can't remember. And obviously, it went so well on part one. I mean, it really was just one of the most creative and wonderful experiences to do. That part two was just, if it ever came about, was something that I was never going to refuse. And I got along so well with Patrice Vermette, who's the designer, that we're very close friends now, and hopefully we'll continue on Messiah when it happens, or if it happens, I'm sure it will. So it was just like a godsend to do a film like that and to work with those guys. I mean, the cameraman Greg Fraser and visual effects Paul Lambert, and they really are at the top of their game, absolutely top of their game. I mean, I couldn't think of a better team to work with, to be perfectly honest. They were just incredible. Everybody involved, the editor Joe Walker and and even the first assistant and just everybody. You know, they were really top draw, and it was good to be part of it.
I guess when you collaborate so well with other people on the film, and you know that the first one is a masterpiece, and then you kind of like as you said, it'd be no brainer to turn it to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
yes to it.
yeah.
But it's
But
just yeah, it's just funny how important it is when you're working with the right people to collaborate. And
oh my God, yeah, that is so important. I can't tell you. You know, it's I've worked on some films where there haven't been nightmares, but you know, you think, thank heavens that it was over. You know, but June was just it was a very very special project, very special. You know, I mean, I doubt if even if we do part three, we'll ever get the chance to do it again. I mean, remember I worked for a producer called Robert Watts many years ago when I was a draftsman on or a junior on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Robert was it was the most amazing producer, and he said every film is like a bubble in your life. You know, you can never recreate it, even if you get the same people again. There's no guarantee you'll be able to recreate it. You know, and even though Dune Part Two was different, it was very close to the first one. You know, but it was just a privilege, and I think because we all knew each other, we knew what each other needed and what each other wanted, and we just collaborated brilliantly.
yes, and once I guess as you said, like every every project's a bubble because you'll have those really good days and then you have some really, really, really bad days.
Mm,
And it's amazing how if you talk to someone in the sort of real world or the normal corporate world and you explain how these
mm.
problems arise, I don't think they ever sort of comprehend like
No,
how much of a bubble you actually are in.
yeah, that's very true. I mean, it's funny, I've heard people talk about like architects and builders when they all come together to build a structure or build a building and then walk away at the end of it all, shake each other's hands and go away. But the thing about films for me is that you build up that camaraderie, you build up that friendship, and then it continues once the film has come out. Because you get all the memories come flooding back as well, and it's a great industry for that. You know, but like I say, Dune was just extremely special.
I think as well, if you watch back projects, you'll think about certain days on set of, oh yeah, I remember that day we went over by 2 hours, or was
Yeah,
happening, or
yeah,
somebody kept messing up their lines and it was just sort of painful. Or that was actually a really good day because we had a Nando's van turn up to set for lunch.
mm, yeah,
Um,
absolutely. No, it's funny because we work like leapfrog. We work. We're one of the first departments to come on board the film, and we're probably one of the last to leave because we have to clear up afterwards as well. So you do see every phase and every aspect of it, and I've always it's great because we see the film before it's shot. We see the film in its rawest state, in its perfect state, through all the concepts, and it's just down to us to make sure those concepts come to life. Really.
just to sort of sidetrack, when you're talking about having the concepts and like the rawest form and basically seeing it from pencil to, should we say like MDF? Uh,
Mm.
I think that probably might be the best way to say it.
Mm.
Do you ever find it that you're still like you've worked in the industry for so long that it could still blow your mind that people could think up these things by drawing them on paper, and then when they're created, standing there on a set and being like, "Wow, like this all started with a pencil and some paper."
Yes, I've still got. It's still magical. I'm a bit long in the tooth now. I've been at this quite a long time, and what you're ultimately doing is using the same materials and the same process for different effects. So, we still use scaffold poles and plaster sheet and timber and stuff to do an Indian palace or Arrakis. But the thing I have to say about Dune was the audacity of the film was, I remember because we shot all the interiors in Budapest, and we'd filled one of their big stages in part one with the corridor of Arrakis, where you see the worm on the wall. And, you know, under normal circumstances, a lot of producers would have said, what the hell am I paying for? You know, just one endless corridor, you know. But you know, Denis' attitude to the movie was he has to supply as much real for the actors to react to. And you get a better movie. And he's absolutely right. But it was just like amazing. I mean, this thing was like 50 feet tall, 300 feet long, you know, 60 feet wide. It was just mad, absolutely mad, you know. But everybody looks at it on the film now and just appreciates it because of what it was and what it is. Yeah, you're right. I mean, yeah, yeah, like I say, it's still magical. I mean, you still have the passion to make sure it looks good. You know, every part of my job is to make sure everything is the way Patrice wants it to be. You know, the finishes, the colors, the guys we get to do any carving or molding work or whatever, you know, they all have to make sure they hit the top note, really, because the detail is everything, really.
Yeah, and you don't really want to you know, the audience sucked out of it if something's off when they're
Oh God, yeah, yeah, absolutely. You've lost them if the moment that happens. I feel you've lost them. You know, you've lost an audience, and I have to say, the advent of digital now, you really do have to try hard, because years ago, when you shot on film, to a certain extent, you could get away with things. I know that the makeup department feel it especially now, because, you know, with digital technology, you see every single nuance of an actor's face in massive detail, and so their level has to come up, you know, massively. But it's the same with us. You know, you do close-ups of stuff, and it's got to look absolutely perfect. But that's part of the job.
Mm. And I guess it comes down to that detail, and as you said, with it being digital, you do get that sort of higher quality. Even now, when I was watching Vertigo, the ITV player, and they've upscaled it quite a lot, and it's still for the colors, and you can tell that things obviously of its time with matte paintings and
Yeah.
certain effects, but you still look at it, you think like, wow, I bet you that all that time ago when they were shooting it, they weren't thinking about how upscaled the colors would be in
Mm.
the future.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's funny because I just absolutely adore watching the old stuff. I'm very critical of the stuff that's being produced now, but I do love you know, looking at, you know, Hitchcock and and John Ford and all that stuff. You know, it's just, and even the old Bogart movies are just incredible, and they're so charming. You know, they're so you know, that you know, they're not going to upset you. You know, but they're just beautiful to watch.
Yeah, and it's again incredible. I guess it's just the sort of craft of
Mm.
how people were making films back then and
Mm.
um, creating those worlds.
Yeah, yeah.
When you're coming back to work on Dune Part 2, did you ever feel there was a bit more pressure when it came to working on the sequel? Because often, whenever people mention sequels of films, it always has to be like, it has to be bigger, it has to be louder, it has to be more action-packed, it has to be more money on the screen. Like, did
Yeah.
you feel that pressure going back
Oh
on?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, Patrice was constantly talking about it, you know, because I remember when I went to the art department when I first started part two and went through all the, because Patrice had shown me all the concept stuff that had been done of all the, and I mean, it was much bigger. I mean, and again, you know, we knew it was a sort of war movie. It wasn't just telling us it was a war movie, and it was a war movie in the desert. So we all went to watch Lawrence of Arabia and to learn how it's done. And but no, you're absolutely right. There was a big pressure to do it, and you know, sadly, the way things are, you know, our budget wasn't vastly different to part one. But a lot of investment had been made in part one, in that the ornithopters were all built, even though we did build one of the Harkonnen bombers, the B, which was a big beast of a ship, but all the rest were already done. So that outlay had already been taken care of. And also the fact that part two had so much more in the desert. Part one was done solely in Jordan because there was a lot of rock and mountain ranges in Jordan and in amongst the desert. But Denis really needed endless dunes, endless sand, and that's why we went to Dubai. United Arab Emirates, really, just in the desert there. But so there was a lot of stuff that we took out to, like entrances and doorways of the sieges, and blended them into rocks, and so the actors knew where they were, and so it was different from that perspective, but it was bigger. I mean, we looked at all the elements that we had to do, like the system of souls where Stilgar pours Janus's body fluids into a pool. That was obviously expanded digitally, but it was still a hell of a set. It was huge. I mean, because I think Denis wanted to get over the scale of it with the actors. He didn't just want to do a little piece in the corner and the rest is green screen. In fact, we never had any green screen at all. We actually used sand screens on Dune, which was because of the light bounce. I mean, when you're out in the desert, I mean, for instance, the Arakeen spaceport, because of that openness, that could not have been achieved using green screen because you get green bounce everywhere, especially if you're outside. There's nothing you can do about it. So Paul Lambert developed a system that it would use sand screen, and that way you'd not only get your sort of your photopaque screen, you'd also get the light bouncing everywhere, and you get that airy feeling, and that was achieved wonderfully on part one and two, because you definitely felt you were in the desert all the time.
Yes, and it's also, I guess another way is just the scope as a director, understanding the scale of what you need to show on screen.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that like not all directors understand it, but I think you can tell the difference between like a big blockbuster director
Mm.
and then somebody who does a lot more quieter,
Mm. Mm.
smaller sort of talky films rather than say like a Jurassic Park or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I guess it's also as a director, it's understanding how you're going to use your space and what you're going to show, but then also for your team to be able to create that space because in Dune Part Two, they feel like there is a very minimalistic feel to it,
Mm.
where in the frame there is a lot of empty space, which like when you go to film school or read books or
Mm.
see YouTube videos, like sometimes there's a bit of a no-no for filmmakers. But
Mm.
I guess as if you know how to use it, then it you can get away with it. But
Mm. Mm.
whilst in the art department, like how do those ideas play into your work and how you guys go about creating the world?
Well, we knew that one of the major concepts of Dune was the empty spaces. The fact that the scale of it had to be shown on screen. And the only way you could do that, you could fill a frame if you wanted to, but you'd never see the scale of it. And so consequently, that's one of the charms of the whole thing, was knowing that, we were going to build sets that had hardly anything in them, but they were enormous. I remember, I mean, funny enough, part one had more of that than part two, in the sense that when we did Arakeen and the spaceport and all that sort of stuff, we had vast amounts of space with nothing in them. But when we did part two, for instance, the Siege, Stilgar's Siege Tabar, was a more enclosed space, filled with sand. And even though it was large, it wasn't along the scale of part one for interiors, I mean. But when you look at the exteriors, like the final worm attack and all of that stuff, that was done in the open desert. And it was great to actually, one of the thrills was actually building a worm for all the worm stuff that we needed with actors on tops of Shai Hulud. We actually attached this thing to the side of one of the stages in Budapest, and I think they were shooting for like 3 months on that. You know, it started off with like a 6-week shoot to do all the stunts and do Paul's riding on it and stuff, and it ended up as 3 months. It ended up as 3 months long because it works so well, you know, with the sand movers and the earth movers and stuff, that, you know, Denis looked at it and thought, I'm going to do it all like this. I'm not going to try and do the only digital stuff will come when we need to see distance, you know. But I mean, as far as the people are concerned, I mean, the guys who we get to work on these things, they're art directors. So what you tend to do is, as soon as they see the concepts and as soon as they see, you know, the space that we have to fill, then it's a very easy job really to make sure that it works properly. But we all keep an eye on it. You know, it's all in a process, and it's done stage by stage. You know, we'll first mark out the stage to see roughly if that's the kind of space that Denis wanted before we start putting the walls in, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, but it's yeah. I like I say, Dune is a strange movie for that, because you never get that chance again. You know, a lot of producers just don't understand why you need that much space, but Legendary were totally on board with it.
That's another thing that kind of comes down to it, is also like the stage space that you need designing. Because effectively sound stages are just big warehouses that you build in, and some of them, like when you go to certain studios, you could have the smallest stage possible, but then also you go to, like for Pinewood, for example, like the 007 stage, which is just humongous. And I remember when I worked on my first film, Spectre, they had built like where Westminster Bridge is, and
Yeah.
they had like this big like printed panoramic view of the city.
Yeah.
Helicopter crash on there, and I remember like being blown away by how like they managed to build this, how we're all standing on this bridge that was holding our weight, and like the space that's being used, and how somebody can transform this area into a set.
That's the magic.
Yeah, it was just crazy. And also as like your first time being on a film and seeing like the scope of it all, it's just
Well, like you, my first film was a James Bond movie, but mine was Octopussy.
okay. Well,
So
throwback.
it was a long time. It was a Roger Moore one, and you know, I remember going on the 007 stage like you, and we'd done the Maharaja's Palace on the 007, and it was like, you know, this is just crazy. You know, I'm in India all of a sudden, you know, and that was the great thing, because I've worked with some absolutely incredible designers and art department over the years. Been very lucky.
I don't think certain people don't realize how mental it is when you do see these sets being built from it all. It's just like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, mental. But you were mentioning about your art directors and seeing them when they look at concept arts, and they sort of get an idea of what needs to be done. And again, with creatives, like I can imagine with everybody putting in the same direction, there must be so much like creative juices flowing. But as being a supervising art director, like how do you divide the work up amongst the team?
Well, the way the process is the same throughout every movie, basically. One of the first things we do, being so early on, is that when the script is finally issued, or we get a script, whether it be the final draft or not, my job is, one of the early jobs is to make a set list, and in that gives the production an idea of how much we're going to have we need, and what's going to be location, what's going to be a set, what's going to be location set, you know, all that sort of stuff. And then once that's determined and we put numbers to everything, then we look at Patrice's concept work that he's had done and his sketches and drawings, and apply it to each of them, and then start to put a budget together, so that then, you know, for instance, and it's not always the same. Sometimes you'll work on a film where, like for instance, you've just mentioned the Bond Spectre. Its screen time on that bridge is probably not that great, but you still need that bridge, and so it's sometimes hard to justify. But Patrice and Denis know each other so well that it's all settled in the sense that I'm going to need the Siege building, I'm going to need the Ornithopters building, I'm going to need this building. So we all know. And then because I'd worked in Budapest before, the strange thing about part two, by the way, was that it happened earlier than we expected it to, because everyone was geared up for it to start in the April of the year we started, but it actually kicked off in February, and consequently, when we went to Budapest, a lot of the people that we wanted to work on the film, who'd worked on part one, were not available, and they couldn't get out of the films that they were doing because they were right in the middle of other stuff. So we had to hire some new faces to work on the film. And I basically, depending on experience, etc., and looking at their ability of the films that they've worked on before, I would divide it up amongst the art. Like, for instance, we had a chap called Andrew Ackland Snow, who was my senior art director on the film, and he is a highly experienced art director. He's been around as long as I have, and I gave him all the siege to do, because it was very geometrical, and it was a larger scale structure, as well as the sunset war room that you saw the final fight in, which sadly, I have to say this whilst I'm talking about this, you didn't see enough of, because it was full of people. But if you'd seen that set, you'd see how vast it was. It was huge. And we didn't see it because it suddenly became about the fight in the arena, and likewise with Ramelo's Den, when we saw Jessica drinking the water of life, that set was huge. That set was big. But if you look at the movie, you'd never guess it, because it's all centered around Jessica and Ramelo and all the Bene Gesserit there, But that's just we're the only ones that know that. We're the only ones that come out disappointed. everybody else is very happy. But no, that's the essence, is getting the right people to work on the right things, and you only get to do that when you know what people are capable of. And so consequently, I think we had 4 art directors, I think maybe 5, and I gave them each elements that I knew that they could handle. Like, we had a guy in Budapest who did the smuggler's harvester that Gurney is in, and again, the inside of that tank was just amazing, but you saw a glimpse of it, just a glimpse. But the actors saw it, and that was the main thing. And then he did a lot of the Gidi Prime stuff. For instance, the Baron's box when he looks out onto the arena and things like that. And also Fade Routher's dressing room. And that was all beautiful, because that was all compound curves. There wasn't a straight line in it. And it was all finished like with a sort of crossover between lead and plastic, because there was a certain aesthetic to Gidi Prime, which was completely different to Caladan and completely different to Arrakis. So we knew exactly where we are all the time. But Patrice had come up with this, and with Denis come up with this amazing way of portraying the Harkonnen, which was in this black and white world. Their sun was black, so everything was done in infrared, which was just genius, really, when you think about it. How are we going to do this and make it look completely different? We'll shoot it all in infrared and have water effects for fireworks, But it was pretty incredible.
I think when you have building a team, and if you're bringing new people on or people on who've worked on the previous, as mentioned before, is like how important it is to get along and then pull it in the same direction. But then also taking in, if it's somebody new, like their suggestions or how it could look, and sort of building around that. I think there's just so much. I guess if you have a theme that you're going through, there's probably sometimes certain people might think there's sort of limitations to it, but then other people think there could be like impossible limitations to what they're doing and how they're going to be building on it.
I think the thing is that a good art director knows what his designer wants and constantly keeps that designer up to speed with what he's doing or what she's doing, so that there's no wasted time and there's no wasted materials. Because you can't really, as an art director, you're not really permitted to just run away with it. You have to, especially with someone like Patrice, who's very big on detail, and it, it's his baby after all. So you don't go ahead and say, oh, I think I'm going to use plastic today. I'm not going to use it. That's not the way it's done. The way it's done is just to stick with the concepts and stick with the designer, and make sure it's all. My main job is to make sure it happens on time and happens on budget. So I have to make sure that if things are going too slowly, I'm there to speed it all up. So that's the way sometimes I will chat to my art directors.
You basically have to crack the whip to see what's going on.
Yeah, sadly, yes. Yeah, I had it for years when I was an art director, so now it's my turn.
I think we slightly touched upon this before as well. When it came to like a project like this has like a mix of location and studio work. But when you're sort of overseeing what people are doing, what's going on, do you ever have to worry about what the continuity would be like between a location and a studio and a set?
Oh
And
God, yeah, yeah.
and then do you have any constraints creatively when it comes to location work?
Constraints, no. I mean, the locations. The thing that you have to understand about part two is that because we did more in the desert, and because we were linking elements like doorways to sets that we were building in Budapest, then we had to make sure, like for instance, when the locations were discovered, one of the things that we did in Jordan and in Dubai was take sand samples. So we went with jars and scooped sand up in the areas where we knew, like for instance, the Cave of Birds, in the scene where the Tabar Siege is destroyed and all the Fremen go into this cave in their injured state. That rock face, when you look at the wide shot, we built the outside of the Cave of Birds in Budapest, shot a frame of it, and then that was taken and patched in later on. But they were matched perfectly because of the color of the rock. I don't know if anybody noticed, but when you go in the Cave of Birds, it's all carved with sort of lines. If anyone wants to look again, it had a very particular look to it. It wasn't just a cave, but we had to make sure that the colors and everything had to match. So that it's not. I don't see it as a restraint. I see it as a sort of expanding of what you're doing, because you know that you're building the interior in one place and the exterior somewhere else, and as long as the two match, and hopefully it does, then the job has been done right. But we built a lot of those entrances and stuff in Budapest and shipped them out to be fixed onto rock faces and stuff in Jordan. Not necessarily the Cave of Birds, because the area where we were going to do that was a national park, so you're not allowed to really do very much. And we were very careful about that, by the way. A lot of the stuff that we did take there, like blocks of polystyrene and whatever, that were already, came away and were taken care of, and you'd never know we'd been there. But it worked beautifully.
That's another thing as well, isn't it? Is like the environmental effect of being on location work, and especially if it's like an environment that's very untouched by humans. So if you're in a desert and whatnot, then it's always like, what happens if we use this material? What could it do to the ecosystem here? And how, what happens if this does disintegrate? Where does it go afterwards? How do we need to make sure that we've cleaned it all up afterwards?
You know what? I have to say this, Rob, that I've been all over the world, and I don't think there's anywhere that hasn't been touched by human beings. I've been to Thailand, I've been to Africa, I've been all over the place. and you can guarantee you'll find a cigarette or a wrapper somewhere. You know, there's no such area that is untouched, I think. You know, people say that about the Arctic as well. You know, but what we've got to make sure is that we don't make it any worse. And sadly, you know, we still use materials in production of sets that are hazardous, like polystyrene. You know, it just doesn't break down. But no one's come up with a material that can replace it, sadly. And actually, it's getting slightly worse now, because I remember when I first started, you know, plaster of Paris was a big material, and now all that's done with expanding foam, and that stuff's even worse. I mean, God knows how you break that down. But
Yeah.
like I say, as far as the desert was concerned, you'd never know we were there. We had a team afterwards just cleaning up constantly, you know, with sieves and stuff and rakes, just to get as much of it out as we possibly could.
You maybe picture the scene of Spaceballs where they've got the big comb. That's what I can picture people doing.
Yeah, I think someone actually mentioned that while we were there. Do you remember that scene in Spaceballs? Yeah, yeah,
But again, it's just one of those things where
yeah.
you do the best you can to make sure that everything is
Mm,
left to how it was before.
no, it's true.
But then what I'm curious to know about as well, I think we touched on this a little bit, is the
Mm,
collaboration process
yes.
between various departments. So I
Yeah.
guess a big one would be VFX,
Yeah.
because you have the VFX team who are probably there on set. Then also you have companies like DNEG who help with the environment stuff as well.
Yeah.
How does that all come into it all? Because I can imagine that you have your sort of ideas and how it's set, and then s sometimes that might not look the same when it goes like translated from paper to screen.
I can't say that's ever happened.
Okay.
I think the thing is, with the onset of digital technology these days, you know, it was different when we did movies, because I come from the days of when we actually used to shoot through glass and paint on glass as matte screens, and have a guy working in a box with a camera for months and months, and weeks painting a painting that matches the set that he's 20 feet above, you know. But now digital allows you so much freedom. But by the same token, Paul Lambert, who is probably, in my estimation, probably the best visual effects coordinator I've ever worked with, and a lovely, lovely guy. You know, he's already got 2 Oscars, and he's probably going to get a third one for part 2 when the time comes. But he deserves it, because he's one of the nicest guys to work. He's one of the most undemanding but knowledgeable people I know, because what he basically does, and we do with him, is give him the opportunity. We build models of everything. Whenever a set is built, whenever a set is designed, I make it my job to make sure we have a highly detailed model of it, a miniature of some form, whether it just be in white card or whatever. Because a lot of people can look at as many construction drawings as you like, but they'll never understand what you're trying to do unless they see it as a model there with little figures in, and, you know, all that sort of stuff, so, and they can get it. But when he works alongside of Greg Fraser and us, because he's part of the thing all the way along. I mean, Paul is there from when we start to when the film is in post-production. So, you know, he oversees it. I mean, when I met him at the screening, I said, how many times have you seen it now? And he said 18 times. So it's like, so he's and he's just sick of it. but you know, you can tell, because you know, one of the great things I must say, and I'll make this plain, when I saw part 1, was the way it was treated from a visual effects point of view. It wasn't like Godzilla. It wasn't like, you know, where they make everything absolutely pin sharp and it looks incredible. The realism goes away. With Dune, it was purposefully made that we were going to hide a lot of things. You knew there was a digital effect there somewhere. But, like, for instance, when Duncan Idaho's ornithopter lands outside Kynes' laboratory, you lose it in a sand, in a dust of, in a swirl of sand, but it looks so real. It works. It's just beautifully done. And I think that was one of the main things about Dune, was everyone was taken by the fact that it was. And Denis always said, we've got to make it look as realistic as possible. I mean, those ornithopters were designed in such a way that they look like they could fly. They weren't one of those silly sort of, I won't say Star Wars ships that just can, they just don't. They look dynamic, but they that they just can't fly. But that wasn't the point of Dune. Dune was to make it look ultra real, and I think they did those guys did an absolutely amazing job, and that's one of the treats for everybody, is to see how your little bit that you've done has suddenly expanded and become something else, and that's what was great about it.
Again, I think like with the whole collaboration process and how you're expanding and how you're saying that they watched it 18 times, which is again crazy to think because it's such a long film. Even as that as like a VFX supervisor watching it, going through to make sure that
Yeah.
everything's correct. And even with having them on in such a early stage as well, probably helped so much to actually be like, are we able to do this? Is like, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the great thing about those guys is that if they know that you're working with them and not against them. Sometimes, I mean, I've seen it, in certain films where the sudden cliques appear and no, we're going to do it this way, but that's not like, no, I don't care, we're going to do it this way. The great thing about the collaboration on Dune was that everybody was working in the same direction, and it shows on screen. It just shows on screen. You can just see it. Every department, the costumes, makeup, everything, just all working on the same, in the same direction. It was just great, because and it's great to actually go down to the set and that everybody is doing the best work and they all care for it. It's not just a 9 to 5 job. Everybody cared about it to such an extent that we had a set decorator, a wonderful set decorator called Shane Vayu, who came on for part 2, and he'd done Shape of Water for Guillermo del Toro, and he created some amazing stuff for Dune Part 2, which you never see. All the rugs on the floors in the Sieges and all the handmade artwork and all that stuff. It was just beautiful. I mean, it really was. It was another level, and whether you see it or not is not up to us. It's just there. I always remember that about Lord of the Rings, when they said, the detail and everything that went into that movie, half of it was lost, but the actors knew it was there. So that's what helped them.
Yeah, especially now in this day and age where, acting against tennis balls or something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the sad thing that I think we drifted into, that we could just stick a green screen and then stick an actor on top of a green saddle, and he'd have to make up the rest. But that was only there because the directors could see on their monitors what the actual film looked like. And that was what Denis does, is he wants to see what we're going to see anyway. We shoot it and that's what you're going to see, except for maybe some extensions somewhere. And you can tell the actors love it. I mean, the actors just really love it. They get so into the characters, and if you're riding on the back of a worm, with wind machines blowing sand at you constantly, how can you not think you're in the desert? So no, it was wonderful to work with them all.
As you said, how does you not feel that you're not in the desert?
Yeah,
You're in these
exactly.
areas.
Yeah, exactly.
Just following on from my previous question as well, is that the film is being projected in various formats. I was lucky to watch it in 70 mil and looked really like crisp and beautiful. But does knowing that you're going to have it in different formats affect the way that you and your team work?
No, not in the slightest. I mean, we have to produce what we produce, and whichever way it's shot. The only way it can affect us is like, you know, is the aspect ratio. Because if you're shooting the old Panavision format, then you know it's pointless building high sets because you'd never see them. So what you tend to do, and it's like with Dune, you know, it's a very horizontal format. And I remember when I first started out in this industry, and I worked with a legendary designer called Elliot Scott, who did Temple of Doom. I did Temple of Doom with him and Labyrinth for Jim Henson. And he taught me so much about the fact that whatever you see through that viewfinder, that's all you need to worry about. Don't worry about what's over there, just whatever's through that viewfinder. And he would make sets that literally tapered. You know, he would it would be small at the foreground and large at the back, because there was no point in building anything else. You just never see it. And he was one of those designers that used to go down with the camera and position it and say, this is how you shoot this set. It's from here, you know, with this lens, etc. It used to drive cameramen insane, because they'd say, well, I'm the camera. No, you stick the camera here and it's 4'6" off the ground and it's a 50mm and blah, blah, blah. And if you do that, you won't have any problems, you know. So, but with when these different formats these days, it only really happens. I mean, we shot some of it on IMAX, but the majority wasn't. But then it was formatted in such a way to be seen on IMAX. So, but as far as we're concerned, nothing really changed. You know, the colors would all be the same. The textures of the sets would all be the same. You know, so it didn't really affect us that much.
Okay, because I guess it's always a way that I always think that when people are shooting or how they're going to be shooting it,
Mm.
what people need to take in consideration for their department of how they'll need to think about how far the scope would be of what's going to be on screen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. I mean, you know, I can say that elements 60 feet away had as much care put into them as stuff 10 foot away, because there's, you know, you'd only I remember when we did part one and we were doing Arakeen, and we had a certain height, and it was like, I don't know, 30 feet, something like that, of the height of the actual textured set. And then we added more, but we did it with cloth so that the visual effects guys could easily replicate the texture, because they had the same color, they had the same light bounce and everything. But at least it gave the actors, when they went onto the set, this kind of wow factor. Wow, look at the size of it, you know. But half of it wasn't there, half of it was just cloth. But it still had to be done, because we were not going to get into a situation where we're just capping things for the sake of it. You know, it had to be seen. It was going to be there in one way or another. Makes me laugh now, really, when we think about it.
There's always, I guess, when you said that, there's always certain things that you're going to see, not see
Mm,
distance from where they're shooting
mm,
and
mm.
whatnot. And I guess it also comes down to the use of space in the film, as we've
Yeah,
discussed.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Just to hit you with my penultimate question,
Yeah,
what was the hardest set for you to work on?
the hardest, the hardest. In what sense? I mean,
I
the
guess it's I guess like in terms of probably a mixture of build, designing, and uh, having it ready in time for when you're going to shoot on it.
you know what? It's funny. The the two that stand out is the is one you probably hardly see at all. It was the underneath of the smuggler's harvester, not the smuggler's harvester, underneath the Harkonnen harvester. We built at the underbelly of that thing with cutout wheels, tank wheels, both sides for the actors to struggle underneath and come out the other side. And there was so much detail in that set, and it weighed. It was actually supported by a crane because it was so big. And we did it in Budapest. We didn't do it in the desert, but we had to match the light and everything. You know, the guys had to match the light. But that was a particularly nightmarish one to do, simply because, you know, we had actors crawling underneath it, and yet it was moving ever so slightly. We had it actually on tracks, and we needed to have it moving. But the other one, that was, it wasn't hard, but I mean the features were a number. They were really, because if you look at every wall in the siege, it was carved, and even though we replicated a lot of it, it was a highly detailed set. And then we brought in tons of sand and swept it up in you know, areas, and literally had ramps of sand for actors to plow through. That was a hard one. And that was one of the earliest ones we did, because we knew how much work was involved in it, you know. And you do that once you see that, once the drawings are done and you work out your square footage, and you say, like, that's going to take about 6 months to build before the cameras even get to it. But another thing to bear in mind about part 2 was that we shot the interiors before the exteriors. So all those interiors that you see were already shot before they went to the desert, which is usually not the way to do it. It's usually you do the exteriors first, and then when you go on stage, you can match any entrances and stuff that they've shot, if you see what I mean. But
Yes.
it worked well.
Yes, it's like the matching of going from one, like the set to location, and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
continuity of there.
yeah. It's best to do it location first and then go to the stage. But we didn't do that because of the time scale and because of the weather. All the desert stuff was the last thing we did. So yeah, that was particularly difficult, because you know, we did have specific entrances for things, you know, for each of the interior elements on Arrakis. We built entrances for and took them to the desert so that actors would see it, walk in, cut, and you're inside the set. But we'd already shot the set, so you've got to remember that as well. All the continuity, you know, of getting actors to look the same way as they did 6 weeks ago when they walked through the stages. And another one that I have to say, and now that I'm thinking about it, was the Emperor's steel tent, because the steel tent, Patrice had designed it, and if you look at it, you'll see what I mean. He designed it to look like the strap of a Rolex watch. So if you look at the way a Rolex watch folds and, you know, moves and stuff, but it's all clamped together. That's the way the floor. If you look at the floor, if you ever see the film again, if you look at the floor, you'll see that it's interlocking pieces that supposedly just all open out once the craft lands. And we did actually, Patrice did actually design a shot for when the Emperor does arrive. He's got this thing underneath the ship, and it just expands like a fountain, and you suddenly realize it's the tent, and it's supported by his ship. And so we did that inside the expo center at Budapest, because we needed a huge amount of space, and we'd run out of space in the stages at Origo Studios. So when we did that, and we did the Giddy Prime corridor with Fade Routher and Lady Fenrig, that was a huge space as well, you know. But it's a big open space. I mean, we just needed that expanse, really. But they were particularly hard. None of it was easy, Rob, I have to say.
I think anything that turns out good and sort of like worthwhile never
Yeah,
be easy, right?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And just to wrap up my episode, what was your favorite set to work on?
Well, you've got to understand that I worked on them all. You know, the sad thing about when you're a supervisor is you don't get to look after one particular set and put your heart into it and make sure everything works and blah, blah, blah. You have to go around and make sure everybody else is doing that. But I must say, you know, one of the worm, the back of the worm was pretty special, and all the little areas that we did inside the Fremen Sieges, which included, you know, Chinese bedroom and the Mother Superior's areas, the Bene Gesserit areas, and things like that. They were just really beautiful sets, and the way Greg Fraser lit them. It's very hard to actually light something that's supposed to be inside of a mountain, you know. So we purposely had these systems where there was air chambers and therefore light coming through. And that was likewise with when we did Arrakis, because the walls of Arrakeen were huge to keep the place cool, and with slots everywhere rather than windows, you know. So it all had a meaning. And I can't really say I have a favorite. I have to say they were all pretty special. You know, you can't say that about your children, can you?
Yeah, exactly. And it's always the question. I kind of like to see people squirm the most because it's like picking their favorite child.
Yeah, exactly.
You also raised a great point is as well, like with Greg, with the idea of like shooting inside a mountain, is like how does light come in, and having these
Mm.
little sort of cheap fixtures put in to sort of help out in that stage as well.
Well, you know, Peter Jackson had the same problem in Moria. Supposed to be inside of a. Where's the light coming from? It would have been absolutely, you know, pitch black. But we accept it and we just go on with it, you know. But I think the thing about, as going back to what Denis was saying, we have to make it look real. You know, we have to. It has to be believable. And the great thing about what was achieved on Dune and Dune Part Two was believability. You know, you think it was there, you think it was real. That's the main achievement. When I walk away from it and think, yeah, we did that and it works, and it was a pleasure to do it.
And I think everybody's really enjoying it. And
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. I really am. I mean, you know, it's funny because people who ask me what it's about, I say, well, look, please just go and see it. I don't, you know, I can't, I can't explain. You know, you'd never understand it. You know, I think George Lucas had the same problem with the first Star Wars. No one could understand the names that he was giving everybody, and never mind what was going on. But with Frank Herbert's book, you know, there's such a relationship with the Arabic culture that you can hear it in every word. You know, Nisan al Gaib and Gom Jabbar and all of these terms are very, very Arabic. You know, and there is a reason for that. So, but no, it was wonderful, and we're all looking forward to number three, hopefully.
yeah, I'm sure we'll see that in the next sort of
Yeah, yeah,
half
well,
a decade or so.
yeah, exactly. Let's hope so. They'll all have aged by then.
Yeah, if not, fix it in post.
Yeah,
Um, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. June Part 2
absolute
is
pleasure.
still out now in cinemas. Go and see Tom and his team's work. Thank you again, Tom.
My pleasure, mate. All the best.
Thank you very much. You take care and bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.